Welcome to another episode of the Reboot Chronicles, a no-holds-barred forum with global leaders, authors, entrepreneurs, and CEOs about how organizations stay focused on growth and innovation in unprecedented times. I'm your host, Dean DeVias, coming to you live from Reviv's North American headquarters in Chicago, and we would like to thank you for joining us from around the globe today. I'd like to welcome Mphasis CEO Nitin Rakesh to the Reboot Chronicles. The $1.6 billion IT services and consulting company has over 37,000 employees working with enterprise clients around the globe. The world's largest private equity firm acquired a majority stake in Mphasis, which was Blackstone's largest tech investment and biggest acquisition in India. Under Nitin's leadership, Mphasis has been on a tear, securing some of their largest deals in history, accelerating digital products and AI services while acquiring and partnering with some of the world's leading tech companies in what is estimated by Gartner to be a $5 trillion business. I also like that Nitin is a co-author of a timely book, Transformation in Times of Crisis. Nitin, good to see you.
Thank you, Dean. Thanks for having me.
The company, showing my age here, but I remember when this company was part of EDS way back in the day, Ross Perot, then HP, and then finally Blackstone, made you, thankfully, an independent company. And it's an amazing historical rebirth of the company. And how have you kind of rebooted this company over the years?
So, Dean, that's a fascinating history of the business. We just finished 25 years last year. In 98, the company was founded on a napkin at a beach in Santa Monica by the two founders who came out of Citibank. And, really, really very simple mission in their mind was, can we help enterprises, especially banks, embrace internet as a way of doing business, right? That's kind of was a very simple founding mission for the firm. And of course, they were very successful very early on and ended up working very closely with some of the biggest brands, especially in the US and India corridor. Expanded their operations into India in 98, 99 timeframe. Ended up doing a bunch of roll-ups backed by private equity firms. And one of the companies they bought was a public company in India. And that's how we ended up being public since 2001. And part of the reason we're having this conversation today is because of that public shareholding that effectively became the reason that we were never completely consolidated under EDS in 2006 or under HP in 2008. And as HP was,
that probably saved you.
Kind of the white knight for us was the public shareholding, right? Ironically.
Yes.
As HP was shedding assets in 2014, 15, 16 timeframe, we ended up, getting spun back out, and Blackstone came in and took over majority control of the business from HP, and the rest of it still stays public. So I normally tell my teams and a lot of stakeholders that I have the rare privilege of running a private equity controlled public company, kind of the best of both worlds, so to speak. But it's really been an amazing journey of reboot, and I think. 7 years in, looking back, I feel proud about the fact that we've reestablished the brand. It's now one of the top 10, businesses out of India in our industry. Actually, we're ranked number 7. We've grown 2x the rate of the market growth, which means we've gained pretty tremendous wallet share. We've also transformed our revenue line, added new geographies, and more importantly, new industries to our business as well. But the most important, I think, the reboot, pivot for us in 2017-18 was. We decided to make a few big bets and then go all in on them. And I'm personally a big fan of not trying to do everything. Strategy is a set of choices, what you choose to do and what you don't choose to do. So we chose to focus on a few things that we wanted to do really, really well. And the 3 big bets, and we're kind of monetizing those as we speak. And I'll talk a little bit more about what happens next. But the 3 big bets, first big bet was every enterprise, every business is a consumer business. But not all of them knew it then.
Oh boy! Yeah.
Right. So
exactly. We're all consumers, no matter where we work. Good point.
Exactly. So there is nothing called B2B left in the world because of the digital revolution. Every consumer is a smartphone consumer, and whether it's a B2B business or a B2B2C business or a B2C business, you have to find a way to give experiences. So brand loyalty isn't just to brands, but also to experiences.
Right.
So that was the first big, insight, which means you have to find ways to deploy technology outside of the core, in front of the customer, use data to drive personalization. In fact, we created this construct of N equals 1, hyper-personalization, and how do you rather disintermediate the end consumer from all the legacy that you've built up over 50 years of consuming tech. So that was the first big bet. Second big bet, linked kind of to that, was as you start thinking about the agility required for enterprises in the way they think about customer centricity and the way they want to launch product very, very quickly, think about over-the-air updates, even for a car, you cannot do that unless you change the way you consume tech. And tech consumption for the longest time was the domain of the CIO in the data center in the back office. And our bet was that every enterprise will have to find ways to consume tech on demand as they go, as a service. And that's a non trivial pivot because for 50 years, you've consumed tech in a certain manner. We are a services company for tech. So tech services will eventually follow tech consumption. So we looked around corners, tried to get a little ahead of that and said, how do we get enterprises to consume tech on demand? And how do we become a partner of choice as they do that? Right? Think about things like the whole DevOps revolution, legacy modernization, cloud migration, cloud
Right.
adoption, data, cyber. So effectively, we pivoted the whole business on this construct of the fact that this is a tech-led pivot and we must go deep in tech. My favorite phrase from 2017-18 that we used to rally the troops was bring the T back in IT, right? Go deep in tech and become a true thought partner for your customers as they think about embracing technology in everything they do. And the third big bet was an enterprise doesn't have infinite resources. As they think about doing this transformation, can you get them more efficient, more productive? And how do you find the money from within the operations? So again, the catchphrase there was it's never about cost, but it's always about cost in an enterprise because of the
Yeah.
constraints that they have on their P&L. So I think it's been a great. Those were the three big reboot pivots that we used, and of course, we designed an org design. We were probably the first company in our industry to adopt a very agile org design with tribes and squads. Kind of the Spotify model applied to services. So we pioneered
Right.
that in our industry, and then we basically chose to organize ourselves around customers versus this trifecta of industry, geography, service line, because customer proximity and going deep with those relationships was important to us. So and kind of
Yeah.
that's kind of what we've been living off for the last few years.
I love your number two one because most companies didn't do that quick enough as the CIOs went from like the guard that keeps you away from the tools that are so precious. Now they've become business people that help us enable the business, or they're fired, quite frankly. But, a lot of people don't know you guys are, we've had other India based, financially based companies on, like Zoho and Core and a couple other public ones, but they were all very much American companies, American based. You're in New York. You're clearly at the center of the universe here. um, how does that affect your two things? Your culture, number one, but number two, more importantly, as you've adopted the three prong model and moved into AI, how have you rebooted your leadership team? Because the guys that got us here, guys and gals, or men and women, are not the same ones that got to take us to a $5 billion company. Is what I'm seeing out there.
So, Dean, very interestingly, right? I could have chosen any strategy as I had the opportunity to, since I was coming in laterally into the business in a few years ago. But you can't just build strategy in isolation to the strength or the culture of the company. So we spend a lot of time doing an outside-in view of where the market is headed, and then doing an inside-out view of where we are best placed to win. Because you can't ignore the endowment or or the current set of capabilities and the teams that you have.
Right.
It was a pretty intensive effort to continue to refresh the teams, but it wasn't a slash and cut and burn model in the first year because, in the end, in a services business, relationships and culture matters a lot. So we've probably been, think of this as an activist investor looking at you know your business almost on a daily basis and saying what could we do different, where are we not performing well, and constantly kept that pressure on ourselves to continue to renovate both our teams, our offerings, our businesses, our pricing models, and pretty much everything about the business. So we have a very almost every 12, 18 months you will see a couple new members in our leadership team. Sometimes we pull them up from within the company, sometimes we go to the market and we find the right people. But the DNA of the firm around that T back in IT has been really the pillar of the business. And I think, given that we started in an era where
Yep.
redesigning business processes around the internet were key, we had a lot of that talent internally, but we had to just shape it in a manner that it was all rowing in the same direction, focused on the same outcomes. And that really has become one of our core DNAs, which is the tech depth that we talked about.
Yeah, I bet. Why do you call yourself the driver in the driverless car of IT services? What does that mean?
So again, go back to the discussion we had over the last few minutes about every enterprise start needing to refresh the way they think about technology in their business. And when I'm a big believer in having purpose in what you do, I mean, it's very easy for a hospital provider to say my purpose is to save lives. Very easy for a pharmaceutical company to have a purpose around creating life-saving drugs. Very easy for an educational institution to have a purpose of improving people's lives. It's that much harder for B2B businesses, especially in enterprise services. But we basically spend a lot of time thinking about what would we really want to drive as a purpose. And we finally came down to the fact that how should we how can we best enable every enterprise to think about having software enable enterprise pretty much in every part of what they do, to an extent that just like an autonomous car, the driver in the driverless car really is software, smart software, self-learning software. So think about how can we get every enterprise to imbibe that mindset, and how can we be that chosen partner who becomes the catalyst for them to actually have that level of smart software in every part of their business.
Yeah, I was trying to understand if it was a positive metaphor or negative, like nobody's driving.
No, it's positive. Software is driving it. How do you get to that
Yeah.
level of software? And of course, you'll always need people with oversight, and human in the loop is never going to go out of fashion in pretty much everything that happens.
The thing I like about you guys looking at Blackstone companies and some of the other PE buyouts is, you've got this client-centric mentality. Okay, great. Everyone says they do that. But you also have, like you just mentioned, the consumer-centric mentality. And you've got like a formula for that. What's that all about?
Yeah, basically goes back to the n equals one mindset. And how do you get n equals one established? If I had to kind of synthesize that into a simple equation, it was right. Can we really use data? And that's where cognitive comes in. That's one of the C's in the C square. And it has to really be native cloud, right? So how can we move every enterprise towards n equals one by really using the power of cloud and cognitive? So that's the X to C square, everything powered by cloud and cognitive. And the idea was, imbibe that hyper personalization model for every enterprise to be able to service their customer in a manner that they really, really know their customer well. And I often ask my clients, right? Yes, you're a bank, you have a very stringent KYC process, but how well do you really know your customer? Right? Until you actually grid a digital avatar of that customer, that to a point that you can actually predict what their needs are going to be, that's kind of what the holy grail should be. And I think we've seen some digital native companies do that, right? Amazon Prime is a great example of hyper personalization. Netflix is a great example of that as well. So how do you imbibe that thinking in an enterprise, pretty much across industries?
Yeah, and many of those enterprises are serving consumers, so the circle begins. I think that's very, very valuable. You get the build by borrow model that we talk about a lot on the show here. You purchased Silverline, I think, for 132 million or something. What was that all about?
It was basically over the last 5 years, what we've been really doing is, we call it build by partner. There's obviously a set of capabilities we have to constantly build, right? So we built 8 technology tribes. We basically built a point of view on almost every, transformation thesis that enterprises were looking to adopt, whether it was data, whether it was machine learning, whether it was software engineering itself. How do you write code in a way that you can launch product quicker? How do you shift left in your entire engineering cycle? How do you modernize existing applications and so on? And then we went around and said, okay, this is now an ecosystem play. It isn't just about
Mm.
us showing up with a point of view and some talent. So how do you bring a lot of these solutions to be native certain platforms? And we made obviously choices on which platforms to partner with. And it's pretty slam dunk that you will have to work with the big three hyperscaler cloud providers. We then chose to work with firms like Snowflake and Databricks, ServiceNow, VMware, and Salesforce. And I think wherever we thought we needed capability that we didn't really thought we had enough time to build, we went out and bought some companies. In fact, our first acquisition was an AWS DevOps design business in the US focused on banks, right? A very
Right.
high-end consulting business for AWS. And the last one we did was Silverline, which is a Salesforce platinum partner. Also was an investee company of Salesforce Ventures themselves. So that's kind of the way
Right.
to plug that capability gap. And I think as we move into the next era, some of this programmatic strategic M&A will pivot as well. But we'll almost always have this mindset of build by partner.
Do you see yourself moving from consulting services to more of actually, owning a lot of, becoming more of the actual rails and platform, like a Salesforce? Like, for instance, financial services, you guys are hardcore in that category. You're all over it. It's one of your biggest. Do you see owning more of Systems are still staying in the Switzerland kind of role,
So Dean,
which is very valuable.
that's I would say a $4 trillion question for the industry right now.
Yeah.
And the reason is very simple. I think we are moving very quickly into an era where machines and humans will get complemented in almost everything that goes on in an enterprise, whether it's operations, customer service, IT operations, or even something as mundane as what you thought was pretty much slam dunk agile software development. And in that era, I think the opportunity to orchestrate a set of technologies to deliver that service or that solution is very high right now. So we are very rapidly moving into an era where we are basically thinking about platform enabled services or services that are delivered on top of a software that we may either own or we may either rent. Right? A good example is a partnership with Go.ai. We really don't want to own that conversational AI platform or the LLM model management platform, but we are incorporating that into solutions that we are taking to market. So
Yeah, and they're a pure play, really good in call centers, happen to overlap on verticals. Makes sense.
absolutely, so I think it's a very very rapidly moving space. We definitely think that there's a tremendous opportunity and value will migrate from what we used to call labor arbitrage to a technology arbitrage model. You have to orchestrate that ecosystem, and we have to deliver services on top of software. So that's the reason why having a lot of these platform partnerships are extremely important. But you may need something on top of that to be able to actually orchestrate that service, which traditionally was
Yeah.
done by people. Right? Simple example: eyes on glass monitoring for an IT help desk or a service desk or a production support environment. You can actually automate 30-40% of that work using machine learning bots, and in some cases, even complement the humans for versus them having to just do everything manually. So when I'm thinking about 100 people supporting that operation, I may be able to do it with 50 people, but 20 of those people will actually be digital workers. So think about this as physical workers and digital workers, and how do you kind of create that platform approach and orchestrate an ecosystem versus just showing up with a number of people, which will always be needed, but probably there is a non-linearity in play here now.
I love some of the vocabulary you use. When you talk about your pipeline, you mentioned tribe drive, tribe driven, archetype led. Sorry, what does that mean? I don't hear that on conference calls
Yeah,
much.
no, I think basically, go back to the T back in IT construct and the fact that this is a tech-led pivot, and the
Yeah,
most value we can add to our enterprise customers and their technology teams is when we show up with a very deeply thought through point of view on, for example, how should they be moving their entire data center to cloud, right? So then, how do you design patterns that are repeatable? How do you build libraries of assets that can be deployed to accelerate that change? How do you take the risk away from it, break down the complexity? So these 8 technology tribes were kind of the building blocks of everything we do in the business. It's a geeky mindset because it requires that level of
yeah,
tech depth for us to be able to provide value. And then
that's why I like it.
archetypes really are. Think of these as pre-configured service types that have repeatability of solution, reference architecture, a delivery template, a way of delivering that can be repeatable and automated, and more
Repeatable,
importantly,
sustainable.
a commercial
Yes.
construct behind it.
And that's where a lot of companies fail, especially you younger companies listening in, as they come in with these client approaches that cause too much change and disruption of the architecture or whatever. Just like, no, we're going to do it this way because we invented this and this
Yeah,
is our patent. And you're coming in saying, no, we have to, these guys are still running Cobalt.
yeah,
We just lost half the audience. I don't know what that is. But yeah, no, I get that.
absolutely. So I think it's about repeatability and scalability. Absolutely.
Without getting too geeky, if you listen to a lot of the CEOs on public calls, they used to drop a lot of words like metaverse that went away, and all. So now it's AI, and systemically, it is going to change a lot of businesses. But they're actually looking to people like you who are really doing things, in terms of automating data extraction. It's not very exciting stuff, but a lot of analysis and workflows and contact center, like you mentioned, and what do you when you look at all the industries out there, where do you see the biggest impact for AI in terms of you do back of the house, front of the house, so
Yeah,
I'll let
yeah,
you pick it.
yeah. So I think, Dean, again, firstly, AI is something that's been around since before I was born,
Yeah,
right? So it's not a new field, but the congruence of large amounts of compute power that has been falling at an exponential rate in terms of price per unit, as well as the explosion of data and the ability to harness the data, is kind of brought us to a point where I think we've hit that tipping point of mass adoption. And like everything, that really becomes mainstream, it started with the B2C side of the house, right? Internet enterprises didn't wake up and said, "I must have an internet way of doing banking." The consumer
Right.
forced them to go there, right? Similarly, I think the consumer is forcing enterprises to embrace Gen AI, and ChatGPT was the tipping point in November of 2022. So the way we think about it is a little bit of what I just talked about, which is the first set of AI applications or the ability to embrace that will be in areas where the friction and the cost is the highest. That's why customer support, contact centers, business operations, claims management, think about something as simple as a new mortgage application. It shouldn't take 45 days, but
Or,
it takes
or
45
claim
days
form. Yeah.
because it's a very highly manual process that requires an underwriter to apply, judgment and context. And can we bring that down to 30 days and then down to 15 days and then probably down to 7 days? The answer is absolutely. So I think the first applications are all going to be around this ability to bend the efficiency curve, and really bring a lot more customer centricity and reduce the friction that sits in processes. As we do that, then you start thinking about, almost all of us today think of our phone as kind of a digital assistant. With Google's
Yeah.
new announcement on Monday or Tuesday, I think you can start thinking about actually having a digital assistant on the phone that will do a lot of the cleanup behind you. You just don't have to scrape 10 websites to find what you're trying to find. It'll actually go and do it for you. I think similarly, every worker in the workforce, especially in the white collar workforce, you will actually have a pretty strong set of co-pilots working with you. Right? I think brilliant marketing strategy for calling it a co-pilot. But that's exactly what this era will entail. And again, this is that next big productivity lever that we had been missing for the last couple of decades. It's definitely upon firms like us and, of course, our clients to continue to move in that journey and embrace things that actually get them more efficient and reduce the friction in the system.
Yeah, and I see all the top dogs in the industry trying to pivot more and more to it. At first, it was their thought leadership, talking about the Deloittes and Accentures of the world down to, smaller like, Mphasis, Capgemini, your competitors,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah.
And then you have hundreds of little guys that are doing maybe smaller categories of how do you compete?
Again, I think it boils down to where can you create a right to win, right? Just because I believe I have good capability, I have to also be able to find a way to differentiate my business. And you know,
That's why I asked, because a lot of technology companies, they have patents and sustain, they've got all these things, and you guys wake up every day
I think the
working on
only way
deals.
the only way to differentiate is through specialization and focus, versus trying to be everything to everybody. And I'll give you an example. Right, there are two very successful businesses in retail, and both of them have adopted very different strategies. Right, we just talked about Walmart all morning with the news flow around their earnings. Very
Yep.
successful model. Right, it's the biggest. It's a Fortune 1 company in the U.S. Highest revenue, but a very different model, right? It's the fortune at the bottom of the pyramid model, right? In every town of America, everyday lowest prices, decent quality, and you know exactly what you will get when you go there because everything is under one roof. And then you have a business like Whole Foods or a Home Depot that chose to specialize in what they really want to be known for. If you want the best quality organic health food, you go to Whole Foods. If you want
Right.
home furnishing and you have a very clear idea of what you're doing around your home, you go to Home Depot. And both of them scaled as well, right? So it's not just that you need to be everything to everybody to scale. You can still build very successful, highly valuable businesses by finding focus and specialization. And that's our endeavor. We're trying very clearly, we're trying the latter. We're trying to make sure that we find our areas of specialization and we go really deep in those. And that's the reason those 8 tribes are the, kind of the living, breathing example of that specialization for us.
The tribes, right? Yeah. Yeah. Good point. So competitively, it's maybe, I mean, a lot of this is relationship, but you clearly, um, you're in a lot of verticals, highly concentrated in one. Geography, is the world your oyster, or what's going to go on there looking forward the next 5 years?
I think incumbency was a US centric business in the US India corridor because obviously we had large engineering talent in India over
And
the.
US based multinational, so that
So
makes you
that's
global.
it. That's still about 75-80% of the business. But over the last 3 years, we've diversified and started creating a little bit more geographic presence on two counts. One, we opened a pretty decent. We already had a business in Europe, UK, and France, and we kind of
Yeah,
expanded that over the last couple of years. We opened our first, headquarters in Canada, in Calgary, and
yeah,
we are expanding rapidly there as well. And then we have an emerging unit that focuses on chosen markets in India and Middle East, in that region, APAC region, but mostly India and Middle East right now. And then, in addition to that, we also opened delivery centers outside India because we wanted to diversify our own supply chain, given what we all went through with the massive disruption during COVID. So we now have people in Taiwan, we have people in Poland and Eastern Europe, Mexico and Costa Rica in Central America, and then in Calgary in Canada, besides having centers in Dallas and Florida in the US. So I think it's a little bit of a diversification of globalization of our business as well as our supply chain. And that will continue to happen think of this as Horizon 1, 2, and 3 markets, and we have a pretty clear
yeah.
plan over the next 3 years.
As well as verticals too. What about Next Labs? What's going to be coming out of there in the
I think
future?
Next Labs is going to continue to do what it has done, which is it's a skunkworks lab. We actually set up our first set of AI initiatives in that lab in 2017. We launched the first set of algorithms and our first patents and came out of machine learning and Next Labs in 2018, and we've been on the cloud marketplaces since 2018 with algorithms that people have been downloading and using and training the models. So I think it's exactly what the idea was. All your Horizon 3 bets get incubated at Next Labs. We then, of course, you have to hypothesize, then you have to validate, and then you have to commercialize. So the first two steps always happen in Next Labs, and then we kind of bring them to mainstream customers through our tribes and archetypes. We're doing
Yeah, I
something
love your.
similar right now with quantum. Right, over the last 3 years, we made an investment in quantum, both with the University of Calgary and with IIT in Madras. We have
Yep,
labs on both sides, and kind of that's the North America India corridor we've created for quantum as well. And we'll continue to pick areas where we think there's long tail opportunity, but we don't know when it will come to fruition. Some bets are always going to be initial experiments, and then we will move on to the next ones. And that's exactly what happened to digital assets under Next Labs as well.
yeah, I love the word you use. Skunkworks, most don't know, is invented by Martin Marietta during World War II. Helped us win the war. So sounds like you're gearing up for battle there.
Absolutely.
So you've had a very eclectic career, kind of like me. You have this ability to go into any industry and take over. So what's it been like, your journey?
I think it's been an exciting journey. There's never a dull moment. There is always the problem solving happens on a daily basis, anyways, in the life of a CEO. But when you switch industries and continents, and I've done that 4 times in the last 25 years, it just pushes you outside your comfort zone, and you're like fish out of water for the first couple of quarters, and hopefully you start figuring out how to get your arms around what you're trying to fix. And I think having that clarity of at least in your mind of what is the size of the prize, and how do you plot a strategy and execute to it, is kind of the most exciting part of being any business. In a way, I'm kind of addicted to the business of business. I'm not very focused. I don't really worry about, I don't know this industry. Well, in the end, it's business. In every business there are levers, and then there are dials you push, and find ways to show value to the customer. So I think as
Exactly.
investment management, wealth management, global funds, offshore funds, private equity, uh, you know, BPO businesses. I worked with the bank setting up their entire middle and back office. And then, of course, I've been in this industry for the last 10 years now, 12 years now, and 10 years as a public company CEO. It's just fascinating. And I think the whole, if you think about this as the business of business, and how do you problem solve, that's kind of what gets me going every morning. And that's where all the creative juices come into play.
Yeah, you've got muscle memory both horizontally and vertically, and that's a rare skill. What's your message to the next generation of leaders? What do they need to learn to or prepare themselves to come work for you?
I think, firstly, in an environment where change is very rapid and the next new tech will take over the world in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years is kind of the
Yeah.
norm. You should expect that. I think the first thing you need to know is learning doesn't stop when you enter the workforce. It actually starts. So it's having that learning quotient, a high learning quotient besides IQ and EQ. I think that's kind of very, very important. Never stop learning, never stop being curious. And that's really what helps helps all of us. We, at least I, all of us here at Mphasis, our leadership team, we make a conscious effort at going into areas where we probably need to learn more than we do, and that pushes us in uncharted waters. Second big message, and I think this is again personal experience. I have a 23-year-old daughter who entered the workforce 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Patience is a virtue that this generation needs to really, really work on. Right? This is the instant gratification generation, and unfortunately or fortunately, anything worth
Yes.
doing is hard and takes time. So I think just be patient, focus on the process of learning and growing versus expecting quick growth because you've been here for a year. I think that's those are the two big messages that I leave with the current generation, and of course, folks that are entering the workforce and potentially will become future leaders.
Yeah, I love that. Can I add a couple words to that besides patience? Perspective and reflection.
And
You
resilience.
mentioned instant gratification. It's like not enough reflection going on. And as business leaders, we need that in our people. Um,
And
I've often
resilience
said
as
that
well. Resilience as well, Dean. It all goes in.
resilience. We're making a list. This
Yeah.
is good.
Absolutely, because you can't be patient if you're not resilient, because not everything will go your way every time.
Yeah, you clearly have pushed through and been resilient. And thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Dean. Absolutely a pleasure, and look forward to many more such podcasts and actively participating as well.
Sounds great. You've been listening to Nitin Rakesh, who is the CEO of Mphasis. This is Dean Tobias with the Reboot Chronicles. I want to thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you soon.